Welcome to the Covered Bridges in New Hampshire podcast, where we discuss all things related to covered bridges in the Granite State. Here's your host, Kim Chandler.
Hello, Covered Bridge people, and welcome to the podcast. Today we're speaking with Bill Caswell, longtime president of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges. Bill discusses the impact and enduring scholarship of Richard Sanders Allen and the publication he launched that continues to connect bridge historians and enthusiasts. Here we go. In this episode, we will learn about the father of covered bridge history, Richard Sanders Allen. Allen was an engineering historian, world-renowned for his research into the iron and steel industries, early aviation, and especially the history of American covered bridges. He was the founder of Covered Bridge Topics, the quarterly magazine of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges. Today we're speaking with the Society's long-term president, Bill Caswell, a lifelong historian, engineer, and one of the leading voices in the world of covered bridges. A native of Narragansett, Bill attended the University of Rhode Island, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in 1984. He has spent his professional career as a civil engineer with the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. After moving to New Hampshire, a supervisor suggested he explore the state's covered bridges, and that simple advice sparked a lifelong passion. The craftsmanship of those structures, combined with his deep interest in history, set him on a path that would shape much of his life's work. Bill and his wife Jennifer have visited most of the standing covered bridges across the United States and Canada. In 2002, he co-founded the research project behind the Covered Spans of Yesteryear website, lostbridges.org, which now documents more than 14,000 covered and uncovered wooden truss bridges. He is also the author of Connecticut and Rhode Island Covered Bridges and the most recent edition of the World Guide to Covered Bridges. Bill remains deeply involved in preservation efforts and has served in many roles with the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges, including newsletter editor, historian, vice president, and since 2014, president. Well, welcome back to the podcast, Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here again for season 2. And today I wanted to talk to you about Richard Sanders Allen. And he went by Rick, correct?
Yeah, I never knew him myself, but everyone that I know who knew him always called him Rick.
Excellent. So Richard Sanders Allen was born on January 4th, 1917 in Saratoga Springs. And do we know much about his early life?
Don't really know a lot, but I do know that his father had a job that included lots of travel. He was an engineer, visited various construction sites. Sometimes Rick got to go along with him on those trips. Sometimes they would be multi-day trips. And during that time, he just developed a passion for travel and learning to read maps, and he always enjoyed history. So it just kind of started along those lines, at least just the general background in loving history.
And do we know how his interest in covered bridges started?
The story I read was from Eugene Bach, who was a friend of his later on, that said Rick saw a collection of photographs that his sister had purchased for a friend of hers that included some covered bridges. And he got curious about the bridges in the photos, wanted to know where they were or learn more about them, and wanted to go visit them and photograph them himself.
Hmm.
And kind of like as some of these hobbies, we all get involved in, you start doing something and then all of a sudden you do more of it and more of it. So on his days off from work, he and his then girlfriend, later wife, would take day trips to go out and visit covered bridges and photograph them, and have picnics, and just make a day of it.
Isn't it great that he also had a spouse that doesn't mind being dragged all over? Looking at
Uh-huh.
covered bridges.
You got to have one of those.
Yep, you do. Oh my goodness. And so by his early 20s, Allen had already seemed deeply immersed in covered bridge research. And in 1941, when he was only about 24, Herbert Congdon referred to him as an authority on covered bridges in the book, The Covered Bridge. How did he become such a recognized expert so quickly and so young?
um, Someone else I knew once said that once he got hooked on something, he would just dive right into it. So once he got interested in covered bridges, he would go looking for whatever information he could find in libraries or from other books, or just trying to absorb as much as he could along the way. So during that research, he also met other people with similar interests, and they started corresponding. They would share information, share photographs. So one example was his Eugene Bach, I mentioned before, who eventually would be working with him on the Topics magazine. In 1930, well, that started earlier. In 1931, the Indiana Historical Society created a covered bridge timber committee or covered timber
Mm.
bridge committee, which documented the state's covered bridges as they were being lost so quickly. The Historical
Mm.
Society was concerned. So Eugene Bach was a member of that committee. So when Rick saw his name mentioned in a 1942 newspaper article, he decided to contact him. And the two struck up a conversation, and next thing you know, they became buddies.
That's
And I'm
awesome.
sure there were lots of other people that have similar stories that he
Mhm.
was, like I said, just looking for information and finding people's names wherever and contacting them, communicating with them.
Right. I'm thinking as you're sharing that, how different research is. You
Mm,
know, I mean, I did go in person and do research, but a lot of it was available right on the internet, which is something Rick probably would have appreciated if he had
yes.
access
Yes,
to it.
I mean, I remember the days when I was getting started of going to libraries and flipping
Mhm.
through newspapers or scanning through microfilms of newspapers, and yeah, it's a slow, painful process.
It is, it definitely is, and I would imagine it takes up a lot more time when you're doing it
Mhm.
that way as well. So, how did Rick's, bridge research evolve into a newsletter?
So, as he kept corresponding with more and more people, it got to the point where he was a bit overwhelmed with the correspondence, not really being able to keep up with the letters and sharing of information. So he decided one time to just write a single letter and just send it to a bunch of people. So he'd get kind of all the information out all at once. So the first issue he did, he just typed up a bunch of information that he had been researching at that time. And in April of 1943, he made a bunch of copies of it and just mailed it out to people. And it was apparently successful because he kept doing that for every month after that for a while.
Wow, and when you say he made copies, what did that look like for him?
So, uh, no scanners like we have today.
Right.
There was a whole lot different operation. So, and I found that interesting because I learned a bit about it myself. And so you could type the sheet, and the first issue was just one page. You typed up the sheet using a special ink in the typewriter, and you could take that ink and put it onto a coated metal surface, which would kind of pick up the ink. And then you could just put papers on top of that metal surface and press them down, and it would make an impression on the paper with that image. So I
Wow.
don't the advertisement I saw for it said you can get about 50 copies out of that, just doing that process. So he would have enough to mail out to his friends.
That must have taken him forever.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, not as long as it would have taken to type 50 letters, but,
I know, right?
it's
Yeah.
still a process. The first issue was 1 page. He continued doing that for about a year and a half monthly, and the later issues were either 2 or 3 pages.
Wow, and he worked on that until he went into the army, right?
Yes, and the last monthly issue is July of 1944 when he went into the Army. And then after the war, he had still been uh, corresponding with Eugene Bach, and Bach worked for a newspaper. He worked for the Indianapolis Star, so he was a little better capable of printing mass quantities. So
Got it.
he would do the printing part of the newsletter, and then Rick was still managing the writing and the mailing.
Wow.
And after a while, there got to be so much interest that they had to start charging a subscription because at that time everything was out of their own pocket, all the expenses for the paper and postage.
Right. I wonder how much postage was in the 1940s.
Yeah, for your 2 or 3 sheet letter, probably 3 cents.
I know. I know. It's like almost a dollar now to mail a letter, I think.
Mhm.
Wow. So, when did Covered Bridge Topics, the magazine, become formally associated with the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges?
So by 1952, Rick's mailing list had grown to about 115 people, which was a little overwhelming for him to be, manually trying to manage the subscriptions, you
Mm,
know, address and mail all the newsletters. So he contacted what was at that time the Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges, asking if they would be able to help with this project. The society had only existed for a little over a year at the time, being kind of put together around December of 1950, and they did agree that it would be something that they felt was worthwhile and wanted to help out with. So the summer 1952 issue was the first one published by the society, which was later incorporated as the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges in August
mhm.
of 1954. So Rick, I think, got out in a very timely, good timing on his part for getting out,
Right.
because on November 28th of 1953, the Saturday Evening Post ran an article about covered bridges, which featured Richard Sanders Allen and the Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges. And shortly after that, they were just inundated with membership requests and subscription requests. So that mailing list of 115 within a year was over 400.
That's excellent. I
Mm,
I it does sound like perfect timing because I think they probably each needed each other, you know,
yep.
his list and their list together, yeah.
Yeah, and I think of it as, this new society which had only existed for a little over a year, taking on something that big. That must have been a, uh, kind of an adventure for them.
Yeah, I would imagine, and they were mostly in Boston, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it
Okay,
was formed in the Boston area,
okay, and was he still in the Saratoga?
and he was still, yes,
Okay,
in New York, yep.
so it's not too far, but still not.
Not right around the corner.
No, not at all, not at all. So after that kind of merger, did what did Alan was he involved with the NSPCB at all?
So he was involved sometimes. I've read in newsletters where he attended meetings or offered presentations at meetings, mostly through the 1950s. He was a regular contributor to topics, even though he wasn't managing it anymore. He did have a regular column in topics up until the pretty much the end of the 1950s, and then that kind of waned a little bit. After that, he kind of went in. Well, he never held an officer position or anything like that. He was just kind of a member who was involved in the society.
Mhm,
By the late 1950s, he started working on his book projects with the nope, getting ahead of myself.
well, no, he did write several books t and yeah, that's one of my next questions. And what I saw he was involved with the Historic American Engineering Record Project, the HARE project.
Yep, that was in the 1980s and 1990s for the first round anyway. Eric Deloney, who was the chief of the Historic American Engineering Record Project, was consulting with Rick just because of his vast knowledge on the covered bridges,
Mhm,
and looking to him for information about which bridges they should be documenting, because the HARE project does a very thorough documentation of the
mhm,
bridges, including
yeah,
engineering drawings and historic research and such. So they wanted to make sure they got the best examples to use with their limited resources. So they went to him as an advisor of which
oh,
bridges should we be documenting, which ones would you recommend. Um, his knowledge was tapped again during the 2006 Federal Highway Administration program called the National Covered Bridges Recording Project, where
mhm.
again they went through that similar process of developing engineering drawings and doing in-depth research on the bridges. So again, they brought him in as an advisor of which bridges should we be documenting, which ones do you recommend.
That's interesting. I was always wondering why they did the ones that they did in our state.
Yeah, trying to find particular examples or the good examples or examples of a specific truss type or
Mhm,
design, and trying to find the prime examples of those types.
right, interesting. And as you mentioned, he wrote several books. In fact, he wrote 6 books focused on covered bridges. Can you talk a little bit about those books and their impact?
Sure. Well, the first one he did was cover bridges of the Northeast, which kind of makes sense because that's the area he was most familiar with, New
Hmm.
York and New England. That came out originally in 1957 and has been reprinted multiple times since then. That was followed with covered bridges of the Mid-Atlantic states in 1959, and those 2 were pretty popular right from the start, and they were written kind of for the general user level. It wasn't a technical book or really getting too deep into, the details of, the truss designs and that kind of stuff. It was written at a more general level, so it was popular to a wider audience than just the covered bridge community.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the reason why those books are still popular today,
Hmm.
just because they're easy reading. Just sit down and get some good stories.
Right.
So those he followed those with 2 small publications, which are really kind of pamphlet size. They're about 20, 30 pages or so.
Hmm.
And the first one of those was Windham County's famous covered bridges, or Windham County in Vermont, which was a revision of a publication originally printed in 1937, and he revised that in 1960. Then
Okay.
there was another one called Rare Old Covered Bridges of Windsor County, Vermont, which followed in 1962. After that, he went back into 2 more of the regional books, Covered Bridges of the Middle West and Covered Bridges of the South, both in 1970, a similar format to the first 2 books he did.
Hmm.
And the last one that I'm aware of, or at least as far as his covered bridge books, because he had written books on other topics as well that I'm not nearly as familiar with,
Right.
but he did one called Old North Country Bridges, about historic bridges of many different types in upstate New York, and that came out in 1983.
Excellent. I do have the rare old covered bridges of Windsor County. I have a copy of that, and I think I have the covered bridges of the Northeast, as well. And so, what do we know about his later life and his work in his later years?
I really don't know a lot about his work in the later years. He did eventually retire to Idaho to be closer to family. Um, at that point, he was getting older, not corresponding as much. David Wright, my predecessor as president, uh, used to tell me that he would call Rick once in a while to just have a conversation, but his hearing was so bad you were yelling at him the whole time trying to talk to him so he
Oh,
could hear
no.
you. So,
Oh.
as we all grow older, we kind of scale down. He had donated by the time he moved to Idaho. He had donated his collections. They were split between the National Society and the Smithsonian Museum of American History. So they got a lot of his material as well. So even though he was no longer researching, people would still contact him for information. He would still, respond to letters for as long as he could, and
Mhm.
he kind of kept up with it. He still had that knowledge, even though he wasn't doing active research anymore.
Right. And he worked as a postman, correct?
He was postmaster around Lake New York for a number of years. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So when he died in 2008, Joseph Conwell described him in topics as, quote, one of the biggest heroes of the covered bridge cause. Those are pretty strong words. And why do you think his work mattered so much to the preservation efforts?
I think it's at least partly because he was so passionate about his research and he just wanted to learn and wanted to know more and wanted to understand. And he was always so willing to share all that information. No matter how busy he was always willing to stop and talk to you and share information, answer your questions. So he just had that reputation that he was the guy with the knowledge, and he was not trying to keep it to himself. He was open to let everybody else know that knowledge.
Right. I think now you're that person.
I try to be.
I'm pretty sure you are.
You know,
You are the person to
don't know
go
how well
to
I'm
for sure.
succeeding, but yes, our Cover Spans a Yes Year project is kind of the same intent. All the information we gather, we try and share it with
Oh,
anyone who's
yeah.
interested.
Yeah. That's my favorite website, by the way. I'm on that website all the time, all the
Thank you.
time. It's very helpful. Okay. So Robert Vogel described Allen as, quote, the most generous, amiable, personable, and unassuming man, which is sort of what you just said. You said you never had the chance to meet him.
No, I hadn't. We corresponded a couple times, which really surprised me the first time I got a letter from him, commenting about our coverage fans a yesteryear project, which started in 2003,
Nice.
and sending the comment about how he thought it was a great idea and kind of encouraged us to move on, keep going with it. So that was a surprise. It caught me off guard, but it was
That's
really
excellent.
nice. And so
Yeah.
we just shared a couple letters back and forth. But by the time I was actively involved in the society, he'd already moved out to Idaho, so we never had a chance to meet.
Right. That's you can't get a better thumbs up from anybody else but him for
You
that.
know,
That's amazing. And in 1943, I saw he wrote that his greatest ambition, aside from being a magazine publisher, which was he ever met? Well, yeah, he did the Covered Bridge
yeah,
topics. That's a magazine.
topics. Mhm.
Was to own a photograph of every existing covered bridge in the United States. Do we know if he ever achieved that goal?
Not that I'm aware of. We don't know that for sure because we have most of his covered bridge collection, but not all of it. Some of the photographs and some of his other information did go to the Smithsonian. But the photos that we do have do represent most of the covered bridges that were existing in the country at the time, but not all of them. If I look through the list, I can recognize some that are missing out of it. So
Mhm.
whether he had actually had photos of those bridges or not, we don't know. So we don't know if he ever completed that goal.
Are the photos, because I know you've shared a lot of the New Hampshire bridge photos with me, all of them, I think. Are the ones that with his name attached to it photos he actually took, or are they also photos that he collected?
A lot
Or
of
did
that is a lot of that is really difficult to know for sure.
Okay.
We do have uh, boxes of his negatives, and those are the ones that we're more confident that were actually his photographs.
Okay.
But in the early years, there were a number of people who had this similar cover bridge interest, and they would often share photos. I mean, that's how the National Society was created in the first place. It was just a group of people who
Mhm.
got together in the Boston area to share stories and photographs of their cover bridge visits. So there are a lot of the printed photos in the collection. We don't necessarily know who who took the photos. The only
Right.
ones we can be fairly confident of are the ones that we have the negatives of.
So speaking of his photos, in 1940, he reported having more than 4,000 covered bridge photographs, and by 1943, he said, quote, "Heaven only knows what it amounts to now." He sounds like he gave up counting.
Mhm.
And how extensive it was the collection that was donated to you?
Uh, it mostly filled about four drawer file cabinets so far. We've scanned
Wow.
all and that's only the paper photographs. We've scanned all the negatives, and there are about 4,400 of those separate separate images, not 4,400 bridges, obviously.
Mhm.
But the paper photos haven't all been scanned yet. We've done some of those. Joseph Conwell was scanning those regularly, but then he passed away in 2017, so
Mhm.
we lost that resource. So there's still a lot more work to do as far as scanning and cataloging exactly how much of his collection there is. But right now, it is all nicely organized in file cabinets, arranged by state and county. Um, so so we can
That's
find things when
excellent.
we need to do research to look for them.
Right. And how has covered bridge topics evolved over the years? And I know we're not using a hectogram anymore to make copies. So tell us a little bit about what topics looks like now.
So eventually, and I didn't um, have a chance to find out kind of exactly when, but the topics today is pretty much standardized on a 16-page format. And whereas the older issues included a lot of just kind of tidbits of information, now it really focuses more on in-depth articles, maybe 2 or 3 articles per issue of really diving into a topic.
Mhm.
So the earlier ones, especially when Rick was doing his research, a lot of the information he found would be kind of random and in different areas and different tidbits, and he would share all of those tidbits. And even
Mhm.
the column he had when the society took over topics was the same thing. It was just a bunch of one line kind of things of information that he had found. So since then, it's evolved into more. just a 2 or 3 article, in-depth article kind of thing with photos from the society's collection from Rick Allen and the others who have donated photos to the society.
Mhm. And, Scott Wagner is the editor now,
Correct.
correct? Does he write all of the articles, or do other people sometimes submit articles?
Well, he's always willing to accept submitted articles. It's sometimes hard to get people to submit articles. So he has had some. He has reprinted some articles from the past. We found that there are so many good articles from the years Joseph Conwell was editor. Some things that and with those being 30 or 40 years old now, a lot of people aren't familiar with them. So we have reprinted some.
That's
Uh,
excellent.
Scott Scott has written a number of articles. Um, Terry Miller had submitted a couple recently, but he passed
Mhm.
away as well. So
Yeah,
we're always looking for people who are willing to write the articles. Yes, and if they're submitted, we'll go through them and add them in when we can.
excellent. And for listeners who want to learn more, how can they get their own copy of Covered Bridge Topics? I already know the answer to this question, but
So people are welcome to become members of the National Society. You can join through our website. It's coveredbridgesociety.org. No punctuation, just all one word. There are options to join either online, or you can print an application and mail it in, or you can attend one of Kim's presentations and she'll have membership brochures.
yes, I do.
The cost is $25 a year. It includes 4 copies of topics each year and 4 copies of our newsletter. The newsletter has more just current events, meeting information, and recent Cover Bridge news. So we've also developed a Cover Bridge website and phone app for um, when you're doing your traveling to help with route planning, things like that.
Mhm.
The website and phone app are both available to the general public, but as a member, you have access to additional features that aren't available to the general public.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about when someone joins or if someone donates, where that money goes?
So most of our donations lately have been towards fire retardant. A number of years ago, we decided that arson was a problem that we could try and tackle, at
Mhm.
least help out in some way. Since we don't get involved in like specific into bridge repairs, we don't have
Mhm.
that kind of technical knowledge to handle that. But we can make fire retardant donations, and we can help protect the structures a little better from uh, arson attempts.
Mhm.
So that's really been the focus for the last 10 years or so, is providing fire retardant for historic covered bridges. So when people do make donations, or the income we earn from sales of books and T-shirts, calendars, and
Mhm.
all that money for the most part goes towards fire retardant purchases. And well, just yesterday we made 2 more donations, one for Pittsford, Vermont, and one for Perrines Bridge in Ulster County, New York. So there's 2 more bridges that sometime this summer will be treated with fire retardant.
That's excellent. Is arson still the number one cause of loss of our bridges today?
About a quarter of the covered bridges lost today are lost to fire.
Ugh.
Not all arson fires. I mean, some are, wildfires out west have taken a couple bridges recently, but yes, arson is still the number one cause of loss.
Ugh. That just makes me so sad. Um, so in the first episode of my podcast, I asked you how many covered bridges you had seen, and you said it would be easier to tell me how many you haven't seen. And you only had a handful left to see, and that was in 2022, I think. So,
Yep.
where are you now?
Well, there haven't been too many taken off the list since then, but there's still about 70 of the 1,000 covered bridges remaining to be visited. And, sometimes that number increases because new ones are still being built.
Right.
And there's been a new one in Ohio in the last couple of years, a new one in Indiana. So the list is growing as well. Unfortunately, except for a small cluster of about a dozen in Quebec, then most of them are scattered all about the country. So even traveling to an area, you still only have an opportunity to visit 1 or 2 covered bridges that you've never been to before.
Right.
Um, we do have a tour planned for next spring in May of 2027 in Western Ohio and Southeastern Indiana.
Nice.
Um, so if anyone is interested, that's going to be a 2-day tour in the middle of May next year. But that will include 2 covered bridges that I personally have never been to before.
Excellent. So you can take 2 more off your list.
2 more off the list. Yes.
And those tours are open to everybody, right? Not just members?
That is correct. It's not just members. Everybody is welcome.
That's excellent.
People who are going to become members, welcome to join us.
That's right. Excellent. Well, I wanna thank you for, talking to me today about, Rick Allen. I see his name everywhere. Some of the best photos that you shared with me of New Hampshire's covered bridges come from his collection, and they are wonderful to have. And I'm grateful for him, and I'm grateful for you for continuing this work to preserve covered bridges, not just in our state, but nationally, globally, because they matter. And I think that's something he identified as a very young person, which is rare in my work with young people to find a lot of young people that love history, especially bridges. But I'm really grateful that he
Yeah,
did that.
knowing that, when he started doing his research, he was only 20 years old at the time,
Yeah,
and he made a whole lifetime out of that, in addition to his interest in aviation and, number of other topics. So,
that's
he
great.
was quite a person, and I do wish I had the opportunity to meet him.
Yeah, I do too. Well, thanks for talking to me today, Bill.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for the invitation.
The Covered Bridges of New Hampshire podcast is created and hosted by me and recorded in Hancock, New Hampshire. The song Old New Hampshire was arranged and performed by Josh Black. Our introduction is courtesy of Greg Kretschmar. This podcast is a companion to my book, Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. You can learn more about the book, explore blog posts, view covered bridge videos and photographs, check event listings, and access an interactive covered bridge map at coveredbridgesnh.com. Follow Covered Bridges of New Hampshire on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for additional content and updates. If you enjoy the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kim Chandler. Thank you for listening.